Welcome to the Brass Junkies, a podcast from the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network featuring interviews with the world's greatest brass players by two thoroughly average ones, Lance LaDuke and myself, Andrew Hitz. Today's episode features Jim Nova, trombonist for the Pittsburgh Symphony. He tells us all about his accordion playing turned pizza parlor owning turned composer father and the role he played in developing him as a musician. He also talks about how he took 39 auditions before winning the big one and about one of his creative outlets that has gotten the attention of John Williams. He tells us all about it next. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I am one of your hosts, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my co-host, Lance LaDuke. How are you doing today, Lance?
I'm marginally acceptable.
I think we'll be the judge of that. So before I introduce our guest for this episode, who is a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony, I would like to ask that if you are enjoying what you're hearing here from the Brass Junkies, especially the unique insights that are provided by the questioning of Mr. Lance LaDuke, if you wouldn't mind going to the iTunes store and leaving us a rating, and if you're feeling brave, even a sentence or two of a review would be super helpful to helping people to find us. But if not, we are just really happy that you are listening. So, our guest for this episode is a fellow resident of the fine city of Pittsburgh, where Lance currently resides, and this is trombone player Jim Nova. How are you doing this evening, Jim?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So, for those for those in the audience who don't know your backstory, could you maybe start by giving us a like where you come from and kind of what your route was to get to the Pittsburgh Symphony?
How far back do you want me to start?
Lance?
1874.
Thought I'd lob that softball out there. So, well, I'm from Connecticut originally. That's where I was born and raised. And my early music education was primarily from my dad. My dad is a trained accordion player, if you can believe it. And
no kidding.
Actually, when my dad was young, he went to a school in Germany where he studied accordion. Like that was back in, in those days, there was actually a pretty serious market for it, and you could go into a conservatory and study accordion. And my dad is originally from Istanbul, Turkey, but when I got old enough to kind of figure out what was going on, I remember asking him, putting all the pieces together, saying, "Wait a minute, we have an Italian last name. You and Mom are both born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey, but we're 100% Albanian. So why do I speak fluent Greek?" And I said,
"What is it with trombone players?" Victor Barranco, who's Puerto Rican and grew up in Alaska, and he talked all about that. So that was pretty hilarious. So,
well, I said to my dad, and I laid all those out to him. I said, are we in some kind of like Balkan witness protection program or something? Like, put as many layers of culture between us as you can, And so anyway, my dad, when he was a kid, he really wanted to play violin, but the only instrument available to him was an accordion. So he started playing that, and he had a really good teacher, and this guy sent him to this school in Germany. And my dad speaks like 6 languages. So he learned how to speak German, and he went to Germany and he studied. And as a matter of fact, he took a series of classes with Paul Hindemith, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually, Paul Hindemith would come to these schools and do like a residency or something. And there's all these like obscure kammer music pieces that he wrote that have accordion in them instead of like piano or any kind of, that's the keyboard instrument. And they're from those residencies. So yeah, my dad was this amazingly well-trained, accordion player. But when he came to the US, it was early 70s and he really couldn't make a living. So he just he did what any good Balkan would do and opened a pizza restaurant. So so that's why I was 180 pounds by the time I was in 8th grade. But So, yeah, but anyway, my dad loved music, and so my brother and I, when we were growing up, he would always put records on and explain the story of the piece. Like a lot of my early memories of music or of childhood were of my dad putting on something like the Firebird Suite and kind of telling me the story of the piece. So that was my early music education. And then when we were, I was kind of getting to middle school age, we moved to South Windsor, Connecticut, which is right near Hartford. And the band director at the high school was the second bassoon player in the Hartford Symphony. And he hooked me up with the second trombone player in the Hartford Symphony, a guy named George Sanders, who up until recently I think was teaching at UConn. And George was the one who put the schools like on my radar. You should audition for this school, you should audition for this. And I came out of the cornfields of Connecticut with my trombone over my head and I got into Curtis, and I went to Curtis for my undergrad. And it's the only time I've ever heard my dad exclaim in joy, because suddenly he was like, "Oh, great, no tuition," So that was a great moment. And then after that, I went to NEC for my master's, and for those that don't know, that's New England Conservatory, of course. I remember using acronyms that we all know in the music community. One time, my brother was like, "Hey, dude, not all of us are music nerds. I don't know what that acronym is. You want to tell me what that is?"
Hey, dude.
Yeah.
SOB? Well, I can tell you what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. FML? Right, yeah. But anyway, then I lived in Boston for a total of 5 years. And Andy, I think that we had met at some point during that time, right? Weren't you there?
Yeah, I was trying to pinpoint exactly when it happened, and I don't know when. I know that we played together and had a lot of mutual friends and hung out, but I was trying to figure out when it actually was. But
yeah, and I played a lot of extra with the Boston Symphony, Boston Pops, and had a pretty good life there. But I always wanted to be in a big orchestra job, so I just kept plugging away. And then I went to the Utah Symphony for 8 years, and I played there. And now I've been in the Pittsburgh Symphony. I can't believe it. I'm going to start my 7th season here. So it's going by quickly, but that's my journey here.
So your dad, is your dad still alive?
Yeah. He is 82. No, he's 80. He's 80. He was 39 when I was born. So,
does he still play?
Oh yeah. He retired, thankfully, right before I moved to Boston, because I was in Philly, and then he sold the restaurant. And if I had been 80 miles from his restaurant as a master's student in Boston, I would have been a sumo wrestler by the end of the first year. There would have been a pizza pipeline up there,
Instead of chalk, you would have been pounding the ground with flour. It would have been awesome.
But no, he retired, and he's actually been writing music. He got back into it, and he, while I was in Utah, I remember he was writing this piece, and he called me and he says, my dad's got an outrageously thick European accent. So he says, "So Jim, I have wrote you this concerto and you will play it with the Boston Pops." And I was like, it doesn't really work like that. I don't just like walk up to Keith and say, "Hey, let's do this tonight. What do you think?"
Hey, Keith.
Yeah. I mean, so he was like, "Well, how do we do this?" And I said, "Well, I said the first thing is we should at least get it recorded. We should play it somewhere to get it recorded, and that way we have a version of it we can give to people." And so my dad, he's a very tenacious person, to say the least. And he, I mean, when I was a kid, he would always say these things to me, like, if I came home with a report card that had all A's and like 1 B+, he would sternly look at the B+ and say, "What is this?" what is this? And I was like, well, I did my best. I tried my hardest. He goes, there are no excuses. There are 24 hours in a day. You will find the time. And it wasn't a mean thing. It wasn't like a taskmaster kind of thing. It was more like, he said, you can find a way. You can push and you can work hard and find a way. And then he would always say these outrageous things. He'd say, oh, Jim, you must make the impossible possible. And, and it was, when I look back on it, I remember rolling my eyes all the time when he would say that stuff. But, then you look at my history, and, the Pittsburgh Symphony was my 39th professional orchestra audition.
Wow.
And I took,
what ages? What was the first one was at what, in what period of time was the 39th?
Started when I was 3. It was crazy, but no, I'm just kidding. No, I started when I was, I pretty much started right when I got to Curtis, because at Curtis, there's this real culture there of like, if you get your degree, you actually failed, like you're supposed to get a job before you graduate. And so there's a real push for it. It's not on purpose. It's not willful. It's just kind of the scene there. And, I studied with Glenn Dodson when I was there, and Glenn Dodson was Joe Alessi's teacher. So, it was quite a lineage there. He was Mark Lawrence's teacher. He was Blair Bollinger's teacher. He's like all these amazing players who had studied with him. And, so, taking all these auditions, I started pretty young, and about half of those auditions, I was either a runner-up or a finalist. So I was like constantly knocking on the door. And, when I was a kid, people are always like, oh, you're never going to, don't go into music. It's too hard or whatever. And so I think about all those times my dad said, make the impossible possible. And there's 24 hours in a day. And, it's like, yeah, the people who really want to be successful are going to be, they're not going to take no for an answer. And, so yeah, I took a lot of auditions, but, the album thing you wanted to talk about. Yeah. My dad, so I said, we got to make this recording. And so I think it was about a year later, he calls me, he says, and he always like skips a bunch of steps when he talks to me. He says, yeah. He says, so Jim, when can you go with me to Bulgaria? What are we going to do in Bulgaria? And he says, I have found this orchestra and we will record the pieces there. And,
this is awesome.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And so I found, we found a time when I could take a week off, and he didn't want to go with me at first. He was like, why don't you just go by yourself? And I was like, no. You're the composer. You need to be there. And it was a really great adventure that we shared, and my mom passed away when I was very young. I was in high school, and I remember, I'm sort of bouncing around, but in terms of my background, I had always been pretty good at the trombone and had a lot of fun doing it, but it wasn't something I really thought about as a life until when I got to high school and I started studying with George Sanders. I was playing this little Yamaha student model horn that, I could open a can with the sound I was getting out of it. It was just, and George was like, look, talking to my parents, he says, you guys you got to get him a better horn. He's really outgrown this instrument and he needs a better one. Now you can get him like a medium bore tenor, like a 36 or something, a Bach 36, or, go for it and get him a real large bore tenor, like a Bach 42 or something. And my mom and dad kind of chatted and they said, let's just get him the good horn. Cause George was like, if he goes into music, he's going to want that big horn eventually. And so they got me the big horn, and I still have that horn. It's an old Bach 42, and my mom basically got it with money that she had been saving for my dad and her to go on like a vacation or something, because we were pretty low middle income family. I never knew any better, but like when I first started doing a lot of heavy work in Boston, and I remember there was one week where I played a whole Boston Pops week with a TV broadcast and a couple recording sessions. And I remember just being like, this starving student, and I get this paycheck, and I called up my dad and I told him what it was. And and he said, how much tax did you get taken out of that check? And I told him what the number was, and he goes, that's more than I made in any week at the restaurant.
Wow.
In terms of take-home income. He's like, you had more taxes taken out than I ever made at the restaurant. And that was the first time I ever really realized that we were barely middle income at the time. You know, I mean, you know, we lived well, but I never knew any better. And when I got to high school, though, you know, and my mom and dad bought me that horn. They bought it for me. I was 15 at the time, and 2 months later, my mom died. And she was not a, you know, she was a kind of a country girl, and she never really got used to being in the U.S. And she left all her friends and family behind. And she was a smart woman, but she just never really liked it in the U.S. and she missed her friends and family. But she knew it was a better life for us here. So she and my dad picked up and moved my brother at the time. You know, I wasn't born yet, and came to the U.S. And so, you know, she had a lot of health problems, and she had a weight problem and high blood pressure and such. And so, you know, she was only 51. She was very young, but she had a heart attack, and I was the one who found her. And it was pretty rough. I was actually I was practicing my horn at the time, and I was like playing, and I remember hearing this loud sound, and I said, what the heck was that? And I ran upstairs, and I was the one who had to call 911 and deal with that whole thing. And my dad raced home, and I remember, you know, the aftermath of that being so hard. And I found a real haven in music. You know, I found myself listening to pieces that I really loved, and pieces that were, you know, I think I listened to the Barber Adagio like a billion times, you know, just because it made me feel really intense. And it was, you know, that following year, you know, I'm 15, and my dad had this subscription to the Hartford Symphony, and he would go all the time, and he would take me occasionally, but my mom and dad would go. They would go to the Hartford Symphony. And so he took me, because my mom had passed away. And I remember going to see the Hartford Symphony play Mahler 5. And after the concert, I remember the combination of the timing of just that piece, and how great it starts so dark with such a funeral march and ends so happy and energetic. I at the end of the concert, I remember standing up and with my dad and just pointing at the orchestra, and he's like, "What are you pointing at?" And I says, "That's what I want to do. I want to do that." And so that's when music stopped being something that I just do, and it really became something that I am. And you know, over the years after that, I sometimes lost sight of that. And whenever I'm having a crappy practice day, or, you know, feeling down about my playing, I just kind of remember that. I try to remember that. And I think we always seem to lose sight of why we got into music in the first place, you know? And it's a healthy dose of reality to remember that, I think so. But
what sorts of things, what sorts of groups did you play with in high school? I mean, once that fire was lit, what sort of outlets were there in your area for you to go try to meet this need?
Well, I began playing... I mean, first of all, the high school that I was in, the band director, he was a great classically trained musician. So, and still is. I think he's now fully retired from both the orchestra and the high school. But I would play in all the groups that were available at the school, and then I played I went to the Hart School and played at the. Played in like the youth wind ensemble, played in the Connecticut Youth Symphony. And as a matter of fact, I even remember learning how to read F horn, because the high school, we didn't have any horn players, but we had 2 good trombone players and a couple trumpet players and a good tuba player. And so I would end up playing the horn parts in brass quintets, and I even played the horn parts in some woodwind quintets.
Whoa.
just because I wanted to play. I just didn't. They needed somebody, and I played. And I actually learned how to read F horn before I learned how to read tenor and alto clef. So, and then my senior year, I must have been playing in 12 or 13 different groups. I mean, jazz band, whatever chamber music I could put together. Guys get together, play quartets, and but then I started playing in the. This was back when Ben Zander used to conduct the youth orchestra at NEC, and Zander used to run that orchestra where there were several youth orchestras at NEC, and his sort of top group, he would think nothing of, if he didn't think anybody played strong enough, that he would just put a freshman college student or a sophomore college student, NEC student in the group. And so my dad, in the fall of my senior year, he called up there to NEC and he said, wanted to know if they had a youth orchestra. And the guy kind of laughed and he said, yeah, we have like 5 of them. So, and I had an uncle who lived in Watertown. And so my dad just stuck me on a Greyhound bus, and I went up there and I auditioned. And I played the David, and I don't know if you both know Ben Zander at all. Do you know him at all? I mean,
read his book. I don't know him, but yeah,
a little bit.
Oh, well, I mean, he's outrageous, and in a good way. And I come in the room and I play the David, and he let me play 2 lines, and he stopped me and he goes, "You're principal," just like that. And he was like, "I knew from the first breath," and so I went downstairs that day and I played in the group from then on for that year. We played Shostakovich 5, and he would do crazy concerts like Symphonic Metamorphosis and Tchaik 6 in the same concert. That was his idea of a program. I mean, it was great. We loved it. We loved it.
What year was that?
That was 1991 and 2. And I asked him to write me a recommendation letter for Curtis, and when I got in, he said, "Well, of course you did. With the recommendation letter I wrote you, I'm surprised they didn't put you on the faculty." It's just outrageous. So, he just talks like that, So, but yeah, I mean, I played in all these different groups, and then when I got to Curtis, it was just an incredible place to go to school because I think it's not just that there's a high level of player there. I mean, there's a lot of schools that have high level of players. I think it's the fact that it's kind of like getting a job in the sense that they only have enough players for an orchestra. So you're playing all the time, and you're not necessarily performing in a concert setting, but you're doing all these like readings and rehearsals. I probably played more literature in the first semester at Curtis than most even conservatory kids get to play in 4 years. We would just, sit down and do a rehearsal and then a quick run through of a Brahms symphony. We would do that kind of stuff. So it just became really ingrained. And Glenn Dodson was just a real amazing teacher. He was a real hero of mine. So, I mean, I could go on and on with stories about him. He's.
I was actually one of the things I was going to ask you was if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like studying with him. So you segued perfectly.
Well, he's larger than he was larger than life in so many ways. I mean, he had this huge personality and just a wonderfully kind and caring man, and so devoted to his students. I remember. Having this one, I had a rough time at Curtis when I was about sophomore, junior year. I was starting to feel so much pressure of being there and not getting better fast enough, and feeling like, oh man, I'm not doing what I need to be doing. And I had this one practice session where I put my horn on a piano, and when I just was taking a break, and I went to take my horn and put it on this piano, and then as I was leaving the room, when I got to the door, I heard this like clink sound, and I turned around, and the bell, the screw joint on the bell had come loose, and the bell had fallen and hit the slide, and it hit it hard enough that it actually dented through both slides. So I couldn't actually I couldn't move the slide, And with the kind of crappy practice session I was having, I was like, this might as well happen. And so. this was back before people had phones on their person at all times. So I went over to the payphone and I called Dodson, and it was like, 5 o'clock or something like that, or 4 o'clock. And he said, "Oh, it's no problem, Jim. Why don't you walk over to my place?" He lived in the city at the time and in Philly. And he said, "Why don't you come over to my place? And I have a little repair tool that can kind of get you going until you can get it to a real repair guy to get it fixed." So I walk over there, and he fixes my horn, kind of gets it going, and then he's like, "Well, you're here, so why don't we just why don't we play some duets and stuff?" And so he pulls out all these duets, and we just keep playing and playing and playing, and it's like, I'm on the floor, and he's just still going like nothing, he just limitless chops, and then he starts putting on these old recordings of like the days when he was in Chicago, and that famous quartet album that they made, like it's like Jay Friedman, Dodson, Crisafulli, and Kleinhammer. And he says, "Yeah, we just went to a church and recorded this stuff like for a radio broadcast." And I was like, "So who's playing first on this one? Are you playing first, or is he playing?" And Johnson was like, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. We were so well matched then, it was, who could say? And and then he says, he says, it's no secret, Jim, that you don't seem like you're very happy right now. Like, is everything going okay? And I start telling him about how I just feel like I'm not getting better fast enough, and I'm putting so much pressure on myself, and I'm really frustrated. And he basically gave me like a really great pep talk and was talking about how, everybody gets better at different speeds and different rates. And he's like, "You're doing really great." And he goes, "Do you remember your audition here?" And I was like, "No, not really." And he goes, "Jim," he's like, "I knew you were going to be the guy, because when you came into audition, you were just this kid from Connecticut, and, you walked in and it was clear that you didn't know who I was, or you didn't know what this place was or anything. And you just came in and you played." And at the end of the audition, he would always ask, people who were auditioning, and I do this now whenever I listen to auditions, especially for school, I always ask kids, "Is there anything that you want to play that you haven't played yet, that if you didn't get to play it, you would feel cheated or you'd feel gypped, like it's like your best thing and you haven't played it yet?" And usually kids are like, "No, I'm fine," And so here I am, this kid from Connecticut, doesn't know who anybody is, doesn't know any better. And he asked me that question, and I looked at him and I go, "Can I play Bolero for you?" And he was like, "Jim, I knew right then you were the guy." Because he's like, he says, "You didn't say it with any ego. You didn't say it like you were like, I'm going to play Bolero for you." He's like, you wanted to play it because you loved it. I could tell you loved it. And so he sort of reminded me about that. And, it was late at that point, and I just felt so much more charged and ready and happy. And he's like, "Well, it's kind of late. I can't have you walking home at this hour. I think it's kind of dangerous, especially with your horn and stuff." He's like, "So I'll give you a ride home." And he backs his Porsche 914 out of the garage, and this car is literally as tall as my waist, and he, it's a nice car, but I mean, he used to do all the work on it himself. He had like this trench dug out under his garage where he would go under and do all the work and stuff. And he was like, it was like in that moment is when my love of German engineering was launched, because I'm a big car freak. And he backs that car out and he says, "Hop in." And I get in the car and he just tears down the streets. And that famous fountain in the center of Philly, he just like tore around that so fast. It was like we're barely hanging on, And so we get to my apartment and I get out of the car and he says, "All right, man, have a good night." And he tears off. And I remember looking at him going, someday I'm going to have a great job and I'm going to drive a fast car just like that.
Hey, this is Lance. We'll get you right back to the interview in just a minute. I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for listening. You've been wonderful. We've got hundreds of you that are listening to every episode, and that's just great. It's very rewarding to Andrew and me. And we wanted to let you know that if you're interested in helping us cover the costs associated with recording and uploading and storing these podcasts, there's a quick and easy way for you to do that, and that's through a site called Patreon, Patreon. And at Patreon, if you sign up through that site, you can pick a dollar amount, $1, $3, $5, $10, however much you want. And every time we upload an episode, your account will be deducted for that amount. And you can set an upper limit per month or per year so that if we end up uploading additional content, that you won't be charged more than wherever you set that limit. You also will get access to some free downloads and behind the scenes things that Andrew and I are working on in preparing for future episodes. So if you're interested in helping out, we'd love to have you help you. Thank you very much for listening. Spread the word. Visit pedalnotemedia.com, click on the donate button, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. And now back to your regularly scheduled podcast, already in progress.
And so, it was a cool story, but that was kind of what he was. He was so devoted to his students, and I always, remember my time with him so fondly. When I would call him, over the years, first thing we would talk about would always, it would be in this order. He would say, "All right, what are you driving these days?" And we would start talking about that, and he goes, "All right, talk to me about the ladies in your life. What's going on?" And then he would be like, "All right, now let's talk about trombone." But he was just this fearless, incredible player. And, right before he died, he was still sounding incredible. He was still sounding amazing. And, it was sad to see him go, especially since every time I drive back east from Pittsburgh, I go right by where he used to live, where he had moved to. So it's sad. But yeah, he was awesome. He was awesome.
I want to get back to the Bulgaria story.
Oh,
so play that out. He calls you how does he land a Bulgarian orchestra?
When can you go to Bulgaria? I love it.
I know. It was like, because at that point, that was like 2000. I want to say 5 or 6, and Bulgaria had been communist not that long before. So, but he studied with this guy, Stephen Gritch, who was a teacher at the Hart School of Music. And Steve Gritch was actually a trombone player. So he
studied accordion with this guy?
No, he studied composition.
Composition, okay.
Yeah. And so this guy would write stuff for him. Sounds like crushing a bottle over there or something. Sorry, that was just my shoulder. Sorry. I'm gonna loosen that up a little. No,
so he's taking lessons from this guy.
He's taking lessons with him, and I think he kind of put him on some kind of a search for recording orchestras and that kind of thing. Places where he could do it affordably, and so he, this orchestra was they have like a service. They have you can actually go there. I don't know if it's still running. I think it still is. And, you can go there and hire them and, do a CD, and they play great. They're a great orchestra. They read really well. So we go to Bulgaria, and, you have to take 4 connections to get there. And, it's crazy. We get in there, and I remember at the time, I was single, and I remember there was some cute cello player in the orchestra, and I said something to my dad about it. I said, "Oh, that's a cellist. It's kind of cute, And he looked at me very sternly, and he says, "Jim, you have to be very careful with the Bulgarian women. They are very seductive." And I was like, "No, ew, what? No, why do you know that?" I was like, "That, oh, yeah." And he's like, "What? I was young man once too." And I was like, no, you weren't. Okay. No. So no, we had this great adventure there, and it was a great time for him because he had tried to be a musician and not succeeded, and so to have something like this happen so late in his life, it was great. And I remember at the end of the last recording session, he was my dad loves to hold court. He loves to like, tell stories and stuff. And all these musicians are there, and they really love the music because it was written in that CD that we made is all music that my dad wrote, and you can actually order it on my website, jimnova.com, and the CD that we made, it's on Summit Records label, and it's all music that my dad wrote. And there's a concerto that's based on Albanian folk melodies that's kind of dedicated to my mom's memory. And there's some smaller pieces that just have strings. One has strings and harp. And then there's this kind of tone poem at the end that has this long trombone obligato, but it's in the orchestra. And the whole CD is about 54 minutes of music. It's all music he wrote. Wow. And so when we finished the last recording session, I remember he said, he was talking to them, and he just has his hands up, and he's like, Jim, it was amazing I could feel the spirit of our ancestors around us as we were playing. And I was like, who talks like that? Like, what are you talking about? So yeah, it was neat. It was neat. I can't help myself. I got to make fun of him. So,
so your professional accordion playing turned pizza parlor owning father wrote an entire album's worth of music that you then went to Bulgaria and recorded.
Correct.
That's
correct.
That's incredible.
And it's actually, the orchestra sounds great. I mean, it's a really well produced product, and the two conductors who ran the thing, one of them actually has since passed away, but the other guy is still running it. And we're Facebook friends. We chat every now and again, and those guys ran that company, that whole process so well. I mean, they really the cadenza I wrote for the concerto, it's kind of it's autobiographical in a way. I wrote it kind of thinking about the day, because it's about my mom. I wrote it about the day that my mom passed away, and there's this really crazy range stuff in it. It goes up to a double high A, and it goes all the way down to a double pedal G, and it's meant to be sort of my image of that day and that scream, and then the just the real darkness that fell after. And but when I was recording the cadenza, I asked this trombone player who played in the orchestra, who was really good, he's an excellent player. I said, would you mind sitting in the booth and just listening? I'd love to have a set of trombone ears in the booth. And he said, oh yes, of course. And so I'm playing through the cadenza, and I'm going through the different parts, and I finish, and I say, I want to come up and listen. And as I'm getting closer to the door, I hear them laughing in there, and I come in, and the trombone player is shaking his finger at me, like he's like, you are a very dangerous man. This crazy cadenza you write, all these crazy high and low notes. It's like other composer hear you do this and think all trombone players do these kind of things. I said, well, it is a cadenza, But you got to remember, this guy's about 2.5 feet taller than me. It seemed like, I felt like a hobbit standing next to this guy. But no, he was a great player, and he actually gave me his solo CD, which he made with that orchestra, and it was fabulous. So
wow.
So did your dad go storming into Keith Lockhart's office and demand that he listen to it?
Well, I mean, I gave the CD to Keith. I mean, up until recently, I was still playing quite a bit there. But with everything in Pittsburgh going the way it has, it's just been, I've gotten so busy now here, and I've got so many things that I want to do. That the constant traveling back and forth has, well, Lance, I'm sure you can relate. It's like at some point I ask myself, what more am I going to do in that situation? So it's time to move on to other things. But when that CD came out, I gave it to Keith, and I gave it to the VP of artistic planning there, and they gave it a listen, and they said, it's great stuff. We'll see if we can do something with it at some point. And nothing's happened yet, but there's been I've played it at a number of conferences, like the ITF, the International Trombone Festival, that came to Salt Lake in 2007. I played a couple of the pieces from that CD on one of the concerts. And, so it comes up every now and again. And my dad's still writing music. I mean, whenever any of my musician friends talk to him, I always warn them. I said, be careful. He's going to write you a piece. So he wrote, he's written a lot of, I've tried to encourage him to write chamber music, because I'm like, look, you can't always have an orchestra sitting around, because this is great. I remember when that CD came out, I got a lot of requests saying, hey, is there any piano reductions of these pieces? I'd love to play some of these pieces. They're nice and interesting, like one of the pieces on that CD, I was a guest faculty member at the Southeast Trombone Symposium this summer, with Colin Williams and George Curran and Brian Hecht and Brad Palmer. They run and Nate Zagonk. They run a really great festival there, and they have a rotating guest every year to be faculty, and they asked me to do it this year, and it was awesome. And one of the recitals, I played one of the pieces my dad wrote. It's not technically particularly difficult, but it's a beautiful little piece, And so people were asking me about making piano versions of it, or do you have piano versions? And I said no. So I called my dad and I said, hey, Dad, you need to do piano reductions of these pieces. And he goes, oh, it's so much work, Jim, to do that. It's so much to reduce these things. And I was like, what? No excuses. There are 24 hours in a day. You will make the impossible possible. And he goes, oh, you are using my words against me. I was like, you're damn right I am.
The guy who booked an orchestra in Bulgaria is saying a piano reduction is a bridge too far.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. So, he got to work, and I said, you got to do this. You got to do this. So
I know you arrange a lot. Do you compose as well?
I don't write, not yet. I just haven't found that spark yet. I haven't really. I'm sure it'll come eventually, But for now, I'm enjoying doing the arranging thing. And
how long have you been doing that?
Well, actually, that started at Curtis. That was. Because at Curtis, the computer science class that you would take basically was teaching you how to use Finale. It was music related. So right from freshman year at Curtis, I was doing Finale projects, and Dodson would always have these gatherings at his house of the Philly section and the Curtis section, and maybe a couple freelancers from town that he knew. And we would have these, he'd call them bone bashes. And we would get together, and it'd be like those parties that Pete has, Pete Sullivan, right. Except he would a little more regular, like maybe a couple times a semester. And we would get together and we would play, and people would be encouraged to bring arrangements. And Dodson would always arrange these insane things and be like, this sounds better on just trombones. This sounds better. So we would play like, Brandenburg concertos and things like that, that he would arrange. And he was like, he made a rule for everybody. Okay, first time you come, you have to bring something, like something, either something like something you bought, or something you have, or something you arranged. So I did an arrangement of the second movement of the Beethoven Seventh Symphony.
Wow!
And did it for 8 parts, and I brought it, and we played it, and that's how my arranging started. So I never really took any formal arranging classes. I basically just taught myself as I went, and through playing things and seeing what works, what doesn't work, that kind of stuff. And so yeah, that's that started way back then.
What are some of the big sort of most common pitfalls with somebody who's starting to write charts like that? What do you tend to? What holes do you step in?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is that I think is as important as writing notes. Make sure you write some rests. I think that actually is one of the biggest pitfalls. People will take some big piece and try and reduce it for 4 or 5 parts, and there's not a single beat of rest. And it's like, well, look, even the strongest of players need to get the horn off their mouth every now and again. And, that's something. And then the melody doesn't always have to be the top voice. That's another one. Like if you balance things right, you can put the melody in the middle. It doesn't matter. Things like that. And I try to, especially if I'm arranging for my own kind of group, I'll make sure that I can play it. Like it's something that's reasonably playable. And I think those are some of the early pitfalls. But with the way recording technology is now, there's so many things you can do to try things out yourself. Either playing along with a track or record, like with a lot of the things that I've been doing lately with all the overdub stuff. It's like I can do, in a way, it's put me in a place where, when I do some of these arrangements where I record all the parts myself, nobody can say when I put it in front of them, oh, this isn't playable, because I'll just be like, well, yes, it is. Listen.
That guy in Bulgaria is standing over their shoulders saying, like, or over your shoulder saying, "I told you." Yeah,
wagging his finger at you.
Yeah.
Right.
So when did you start doing the overdubs? When did you start recording your all the parts?
Well, that actually was I can't believe it. It's 3 years now. It's been 3 years, and when I got the job in the Pittsburgh Symphony. The part of the job, in addition to being the second player, I'm also the utility player. And what that basically means is I play any part in the section. And I didn't own a bass trombone at that time. So, I went down, got my NRA license and, got my clearances and, I picked up a bass trombone after I won the job. And, Pete Sullivan was like, look, don't worry about it. You don't have to get a bass trombone. We just need you to play the bottom part occasionally on some, just for, to make sure that the workload is divided up evenly. But I remember thinking to myself, like, wait a minute. I'm not going to sub for Murray Crew on a tenor. He's one of the great bass trombonists of the world. Like, I'm not going to go play his part to give him time off and then play it on a tenor. So I set out to get a bass trombone and settle that up and figure it out. And so I started playing bass trombone. And I had always appreciated that it was a very different instrument than tenor, but until I started playing it, I was like, man, now I get it. Now I understand. And I immediately started to get an eating disorder. I started to drool from both sides of my mouth.
IQ plummeted.
Yeah, but no, it was fun. I actually really enjoy it, and it's especially fun to play a piece that I have played tenor on a billion times and play the bass part. Like in the last couple of years, I've gotten to play the bass trombone part on Beethoven 9. I've gotten to play the bass trombone part on Brahms 1, 1812, all these great pieces, and I'm like, wow, it's weird to like read a part that I've never played before on a piece I've played a lot, so that's a lot of fun. But that's what opened the door to the overdubbing was, I had a bass trombone and I was playing it. And 3 years ago, it was actually this time of year, it was late August, and I was looking, was getting ready for the season. And I said, okay, I gotta, let's, get back into shape for the season. And I thought maybe it'd be kind of fun to play around with multi-track stuff, so I just downloaded a free copy of Audacity, and I had this old mic that I used that I put through an adapter to plug into my laptop, and I just started with this Superman arrangement that that I had, and it's actually on my SoundCloud site. If you go to www.soundcloud.com/Jim Nova, JIMNOVA, it has all my overdubs on there. And one of the first ones was of the Superman arrangement. And if you listen to that, and then you listen to one of the most recent ones, you can hear the tremendous changes that have happened since I started that. But, I just basically didn't know what I was doing. I just played, and I had this arrangement for 9 trombones of Superman like the main theme from Superman. It was an arrangement I had done for a group that I played in Utah, which was run by Rusty McKinney. He's a retired bass trombone player of the Utah Symphony. He had a trombone choir there, and we would play a bunch of arrangements. It was a mixture of players, weekend warrior types, and all the way up through professionals and students, and it didn't a really mixed bag. But he would do a lot of people would arrange for the group, and so I took that arrangement and started recording it, and I just went chunk by chunk, and then I put it up somewhere, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should put it on SoundCloud. That's a much better site for music as opposed to just putting it on YouTube or something where they compress it a lot." And then another friend said, "You should try panning the tracks and put them, spread them out so that they're on the image like they would be if they were recorded live, like a group." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that." So I started doing that. And, I found I really enjoyed it. And, I put it on SoundCloud, and I was like, "Oh, maybe 10 people will listen to it and it'll be kind of cool or whatever." Well, my SoundCloud site just passed 252,000 listens.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's I still can't believe it. It's just like, I have no idea people would enjoy it that much. But I started doing like more John Williams stuff. I did some classical things. I did, I even overdubbed a quartet that my dad wrote some time ago. I asked him to write because my mom used to sing these like little, sort of pop tunes and fun and sort of folk tunes and things like that. She would just kind of sing them, and my dad knew them. And so I said, "Why don't you write me a quartet based on those?" And it's called Songs My Mom Sang. And it's a quartet, and it's really cool. And I overdubbed that, and so that's some of the stuff. But I do a lot of I'm a huge John Williams fan, and I've gotten to play with him in numerous occasions. And when I was a student in Boston, I played with him there, and I started to play with him enough that he actually started to address me by name. And then when I got to Utah, the Winter Olympics.
Get out of my dressing room, Jim.
Yeah.
Get out of my car, Jim. Please stay away from me, Jim.
Here's your restraining order, Jim. Right? No, he's such a wonderful guy, and the Winter Olympics happened in Utah, and he wrote the theme for that, and so I got to record that with him there. And then I would play with him in Boston every now and again, and he's getting on in years now. I think he's starting to cut back his performing schedule, but he came to Pittsburgh one of my first seasons, and I saw him backstage, and he walked up to me. He goes, "So you're here now?" Like, it's like I was very confused when I saw you back in the trombone section. I said, "Yeah, it's part of the whole trombone witness protection program. They just keep moving us from orchestra to orchestra, But yeah, I've been a huge fan of his for a long, long time, and I chatted with him backstage at one point at one of the last Boston Pops concerts I played, and he said, we were chatting, and I said, "Hey, so I don't know if you've heard about these overdub recordings I've been doing, arrangements of your stuff, and I've been putting them on this site, and people are really loving them." And he goes, "Oh, really?" He goes, "How many parts are we talking? Like, 4 or 5 parts?" And I was like, actually, in some cases it's like 14 to 16, in a couple cases 19 parts. And he was a trombone player, so he's like, his eyes got all wide, and he says, "Really? I would really like to hear that." And so it took me a while, but I finally decided to just send him something about a month ago, actually. And I know he's got to be neck deep right now in scoring the new Star Wars movie, and so I sent it to him just because I was like, I want to send it to him. I sent him the scores and just a short little packet, and I expected to hear from him maybe months from now when he got around to it. Well, 2 weeks later, he sent me a handwritten letter and saying how much he enjoyed it, and and he can see what great work I'm doing and wishing me continued success, and he looks forward to seeing me again soon sometime. And I was like, he not only wrote it by hand, he addressed it by hand.
Wow.
And I'm just like, I couldn't believe it. I put it up on Facebook, and I was like, I just couldn't believe it. And it was so amazing. And, so many people chimed in and said how, it's amazing, but in a way it's exactly the way he is. Of course he would find time to do that. And, I don't even know how a man like that has the time to do anything. He's probably so busy, but anyway, so a lot of these overdubs I've been doing have been of his music. And, I really try to stay as close as I can to the score. And I've actually been really working hard to try and get Hal Leonard to publish them, and they've been kind of on the mindset of, well, these are too hard. They're not widely, there's not a wide market for it. There's not really a lot and I think they actually underestimate the number of trombone choirs in the country, and not to mention the number of, tenacious players who would love to play this stuff. And so, I've been trying to get performances to happen to these pieces because, boy, have I learned a lot about the legalities of performance versus publishing versus recording and mechanical licensing and all that kind of stuff. I've learned so much about it in the last few years, but I'm sort of on a mission now. And I think this letter from John Williams will help to kind of get Hal Leonard to see the light, that there's a lot of good, especially educational wise, to accomplish with these arrangements. And, and my recordings kind of serve as a best case scenario in terms of, here's what they can sound like, mm-hmm. And, it all started a couple of years ago. People started calling me and saying, hey, we'd love these recordings you've been making. We'd love for you to come bring them and perform. We can perform them with our trombone choir. And I always am like, well, just remember, they're not, these aren't Bruckner motets. They're pretty hard. So.
You do, I'm assuming you do some sort of click track, and do you tend to start where do you start? Does it depend on each chart?
Yeah, it really depends on the piece. Initially I started with Audacity, but now I use Logic, and that's really, it's a lot of bang for your buck. When the first time I ever really did any overdubbing, it actually started in Utah. I was doing some recording work there, and this one company they were recording, I don't remember which World of Warcraft game it was. I don't play those games. I play video games, but I don't play World of Warcraft. But they were recording the soundtrack for that, and it was right before I left for Pittsburgh, and the contractor knew I played bass and tenor. So he brought me in, and I overdubbed all the parts myself. Like he had a click track and all that. And that's sort of what planted the seed for the future. And so, yeah, I usually start with a click track. I always use a click track, but once enough voices get recorded, I can take it out, and I just try to make sure I play with what's happening. But it's an art form to figure out which part to start with. And, you have to make sure that whatever part you start with is deadly accurate for pitch, because that's the tree that everything's based on in terms of, one of my early overdubs, I did this arrangement of the Ehrlicht movement from Mahler 2 for 5 parts.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really, really beautiful piece, of course, and the arrangement, is I'm playing like the trumpet chorale from the symphony, like in the written octave. I'm playing it in that, with alto trombone on top, and the opening chorale is in D flat major, and I recorded it, and then I get to the end of that chorale, and I'm like, something's not right, and I can't figure out what's wrong. Like something doesn't sound right, and it's in tune, but and so I went back and I listened to each voice, and then I realized that the first voice that I recorded I think I recorded like the fourth part or something sort of middle register, middle step. A couple places I sank in pitch just like maybe 10 cents flat, maybe 12 cents flat. And then everything else got tuned to that. So it was almost like the whole group went 10 cents flat together at the exact same time and then went back out. And so it's stuff like that that gets really frustrating, because then, all you can do is scrap it and start over. You gotta start over because you can't fix that, But that's really the key is going a little bit at a time and making sure, like I've created a bunch of tuning drones with this overdub stuff, like where I've recorded, open fifths, major and minor chords of just myself playing, and I've made these long 5-minute tuning drones out of them. I give them to my students to play with when they're preparing an etude, and then I tell them, like, if you use this tuning drone and a click track, it's kind of like the two lines on the road as you're driving down the road. Like if you practice your etudes with those two things going, and you can get it to sound good with those two fence posts, then when you take them away, you should be closer to where you need to be. Mm-hmm. And I say that pitch to me is like keeping a house clean. You're never done. It's never, the minute you clean it, it's dirty again, so your pitch is like, takes constant diligence. And so sometimes when I'm doing an overdub, I'll drop my own tuning drones into certain spots just to make sure that the first couple voices are really solid, and then I'll take it out and then build from there. And I find it to be a really fun way to practice, because at the end of your session, you have this product that you're listening to, that you have this thing that you created, mm-hmm. And you also get to experiment. It's a great way to experiment with arranging, because you can try these things and be like, oh, that doesn't really work, but maybe if I split this part up, and, it gives you a really great ear for staggering breaths and how that works, and how you can make two players sound like they just never stop playing. And, it's just so there's so many great applications. And the best part is that you are constantly play, stop, listen, adjust, and then play again. And so athletically, like I was working on one today, and I was at it for like 5 hours, and I never felt tired, because I was never pushing it past a certain point. I mean, I would, I'd reach for things, I'd go for things, and I'd be much more nitpicky on myself than I would ever be with a group if they were playing it or something, just making every nuance, I've also been, I found myself in a position where I've finished recording something and it's perfectly fine. It's technically great. Articulation, rhythm, pitch, everything's great, but it's just boring. And I've started over, and I just said, no, it's boring. That's not why we play, and so if something's really exciting and there's a teeny little flaw, maybe it's not perfectly in tune, or maybe it's not perfectly together, okay, that's fine. I'll let it go if it's really exciting or really moving, that's what I go for. So it's almost like I imagine a painter or a sculptor feels like, except it's music, And so I'm like kind of sculpting it, and that's why it's so addictive. I find that the time I get in the zone, and the time just melts by, and it's a lot of fun. So,
how long do you spend on any? Is there I'm assuming that it's taking less time over time because you're more efficient in terms of the workflow. But
sure.
How long does it take you from conception to recording, and how many do you put out in an average year?
Well, it depends on how. It's funny, the more technical ones are actually easier to put together, because when something's really static, like chorales and things like that, if it's not in tune, it just sounds terrible. It sounds like spoiled milk. It just I end up spending more time on the real chorale-like things than I do with the more technical ones. But If I'm really hitting it, I can sometimes get an entire one done in a couple of days.
Wow.
And as far as the arranging goes, that takes the longest. That probably takes, I just kind of do it when I can and I work at it. And that's another cool thing about the recording is like I'll take the arrangement and I'll write in red pen the things I'm changing. Like as I go, I'll conceptualize something. I'll be like, oh, that didn't really work. Maybe change this, move this to this voice. This needs to be doubled. This needs to be,
And then you go back and fix the arrangement to fit what you recorded. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What a great creative outlet for you on so many levels. That's
awesome.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah,
writing, playing, production. I mean, it seems like it's a limitless opportunity for you to learn about your own playing, your own writing, everything. It's fantastic.
Exactly. I mean, it's do you guys know a trombone player named Sean Mulcahy? He's
I know the name.
The name sounds familiar.
I mean, he's not related to Mike Mulcahy or Craig Mulcahy, but he was a NEC student. He studied with Norman. I studied with Norman for my master's, and I have a whole host of things I could say about Norman. I mean, what an incredible musician, artist, and teacher, and really great friend. But Sean studied with him. And Sean and I are friends. He used to work at the Shires factory, and I would see him now and again. And when my recordings really started to get popular, I remember he called me one time, and he was like, Jim, a couple of buddies of mine and I are sitting around drinking some beer, like listening to your overdubs, and we can't decide which part of the creation of these overdubs we hate you more for. The fact that you arranged all this stuff and the arrangements sound as cool as they do, the fact that you can play every part like you can, or the fact that you can record and produce them and mix and master them as well as you can. So we just decided we're just going to hate you equally for all that.
That's loving.
You should put that on your LinkedIn profile. I'm hated from America to Bulgaria, and all points in between. So, well, we are just about out of time. But before we let you go, I'm sure that you've heard about our dear friend Jens Lindemann and the chop problems that he's been going through, and so
poor Jens.
Poor Jens. So we were just wondering if you could maybe offer him some words of encouragement.
Well, it's my understanding that he and Pete Sullivan are old friends, and
Canadians, they stick together.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think Pete mentioned something about him having some issues at some point, and I felt for the guy. I mean, he said that he just went up for that high note, and it just there was some gastrointestinal stress. And,
something give.
I think the phrase "blow your O-ring." So maybe a little white vinegar might help. I don't know Jens at all. I just know my reputation. But there are preventative measures that can be taken to avoid that kind of leakage. So
no more leather pants.
No more leather pants. No more white pants either.
Right.
Trombone players. Joe had really good advice for him too, which was
what did he say?
He told him to coat his lips with olive oil, then lick the olive oil off, and then call him. That was his full advice.
That's called a Sicilian, embouchure massage, I think, right?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's really funny. You've been awesome. This has been fascinating. I wanted to leave you with one thing that I figured would put a smile on your face between the playing a lot with the Pops and also playing in the Utah Symphony. You obviously know Gary Offenloch very well. And
of course. Yeah.
He was my he played a full season with the Boston Symphony in 1989-90 when Chester Schmitz was on sabbatical. That was my freshman year of high school, and I studied with him and for that year. And the tidbit that will put a smile on your face is that every single lesson, when I had a lesson every other week, and it was for 2 hours, which was a great testament to how great a teacher he was, because the 2 hours, even as a 14-year-old, would fly by. But there was time for some talking, and every lesson he would start a story. he'd be like, "Oh man, it reminds you, this one time," and then he would look at me and he would be like, "Wait a minute," and then he would say, "Come back to me when you're 18 and I can tell you that story." I'm talking twice a month that happened, unless it happened more than once in the same lesson. But I'm like 14. I was always like, "Man, come on, just tell me the story." And he'd be like, "Your dad drove you here. He's downstairs. I cannot tell you that story."
Yeah.
So I thought that you'd appreciate that.
Oh,
so.
yeah. Gary and I are still in pretty close touch. So yeah.
Good. We're going to have him on here at some point. So.
Wow. You better get that bleep ready.
Yeah, we're going to. The bleep. The bleeper got a workout with Marty Hackelman last episode, so we figured that we would warm up with Marty and then work our way up to Gary. So yeah, we'll see. So, is there anything else that we left out, Lance?
Well, you talked about your SoundCloud page and your website. Any place else people should look for you online?
Well, I was a guest at the American Trombone Workshop this year, which used to be called the Eastern Trombone Workshop, and I actually there's several videos on there and recordings of, like, I played a concert with the Washington Trombone Ensemble of all my arrangements, and then I played this really cool piece that Norman Bolter wrote that he conducted at the thing that was written for alto, tenor, and bass trombone.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that's a great one to look up. I would encourage people to look that up. And if anyone has any trouble finding it, they can email me, and I'll send them to the right place. Jim@jimnova.com is my email address, so even a trombone player can remember it.
And also, I'm going to check out that recording of the orchestra and your father's music, which you said is also available on your website. So people should go. Yeah, if you support musicians like if you want to support musicians like Jim and what he does, buy an album, even if it's on Spotify. Like, go buy it. It's funny how nobody buys music anymore, but those of us like that are musicians, we used to buy 90% of all the music that got sold, and we don't tend to buy music anymore either. So we're actually the main problem, not the casual listeners. So if you are enjoying this interview, go buy the album, because I bet it's really great. So there's my soapbox moment. So I got it in at the buzzer. I think that's it. That's some really good advice for Jens, and just the way that the whole thing started, where you said how far back, and then you just the pizza parlor, and
that's great. Really interesting stuff.
Really interesting, and just such moving stuff about your mother and what she meant to you, and the horn, and I mean, it's like. Yeah, we went from the absurd to, like, as insightful and personal as it possibly gets, and then we are wrapping up with the absurd, because that's generally what we excel at. So
do what you do best.
Exactly. So yeah, you were making me feel things. I'm not comfortable, so let's do some slapstick. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Jim, and that wraps another episode of the Brass Junkies. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to help support the podcast in order to make more episodes like this one possible, please visit pedalnotemedia.com/donate for more details. Also, be sure to check out our latest recording, The Brass Recording Project, at brassrecordingproject.com. The Brass Junkies is produced by Austin Boyer and Buddy Deschler of the Fredericksburg Brass Institute. Executive producers are Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.
Ho!